Thank you for checking out the Sportsline Podcast on the CHCH media platform and Parrot. I'm Bubba O'Neill. Folks, as you know, I'm always intrigued by the number of outstanding athletes, executives, officials, and even in particular, some sports that have been produced or hail from Southern Ontario. Today, we look back at our nation's past, present, and look to the future. Folks, according to a CBC historical program, this sport stands alone as one of the greatest Canadian inventions. With a lifeline that reaches back to the early 1900s, five-pin bowling is uniquely Canadian and in Hamilton was a booming business. Adored because it appealed to children, women, and men of all ages, five-pin was a favorite due to the size and weight of the ball and less stress on the body. Yet, following a huge boom in the late 1960s and the 1970s, many facilities across this country have reached its final frame. As a professional player, builder, and executive, Walter Heeney has seen the sport from all angles. He's the author of A Trip Down Memory Lane, so let's take a trip down memory lane. Walter, thank you for joining us on the Sportsline Podcast.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, really. Thank you.
I'll tell you, you really have, when I look at what you've done over your career, bowling has been your life.
Well, bowling's been my life for sure, and I was lucky enough in 1974 to get hired by the Ontario Bowlers Congress and work for them for 25 years. And one of the key things that happened just prior to that, I was working with Shell Canada, and they were putting a bowling column in the Toronto Star, and they were having trouble getting the person to continue and have enough content. So Jack Fine, one of the proprietors, enabled me to have an interview with Jim Proudfoot, who was the editor of the Star back in those days. And Jim said, write me a column. So I wrote him a column about a fellow named Elmer Hull, who was a Kitchener world champion horseshoe player. And he also turned out to be a world champion bowler, a Canadian champion. So I compared the two, how he was a match play genius or a competitor in both. And Proudfoot said the magic words to me: give me 2 columns a week and I'll pay you for them. And I thought, that's pretty good.
You know, you joined the Masters Bowling Association. We go back to 1969, but I'm going to go even further back. When did the sport first appeal to you?
Well, the first appeal to me, we used to bowl with our church at Riverdale Bowling Lanes at Parliament and Queen in Toronto, and that was in the late 50s. And that's when I first got involved with the game. And then in '62, when I finished high school, I was going down to, we bowled at a place called the Beach Alleys down at Woodbine and Queen, and we started to get better. And by the mid-'60s, I was playing at a pretty good level. The company, every company had a bowling league. So when I went from Coca-Cola, which was my first job, and then I went to Rustcraft Greeting Cards, they had a bowling team, a bowling league, and so on. And so I was using that league, and I raised my average substantially, and that put me into the Masters, which started in '64. I came along in '69.
Why do you believe that bowling, at that time, when you're starting to really enjoy and understand the sport, it really does seem like it was the recreation of choice for people? Why so?
Well, why so? Because there wasn't that many other things to do, believe it or not. Every teacher bowled. Monday and Tuesday nights at 4 o'clock, teachers went bowling. There was no Blue Jays at the time, of course. There was no Raptors. The Toronto Maple Leafs had a AAA baseball team at the bottom of Fleet Street, down on Bathurst there. Mm-hmm. And as you know, back in those days, even Sunday sports ended at 6 o'clock.
Yep.
When we went to the Maple Leaf Gardens to see the Junior A, the St. Mike's and the Marlies play a doubleheader, the first 2 periods were straight time, and then the third period was stop time. And that got it done by 6 o'clock. Even when we were watching the baseball team, the Maple Leafs, they played a doubleheader on Sunday, 9 innings and 7 innings, because the games had to end at 6 o'clock. And by the way, I just saw it, just because he passed away just now, the St. Michael's goaltender was Jerry McNamara.
Yes.
And they would play McNamara's band when he come out on the ice. Mm-hmm. And as I read in the paper, a nice column by Gord Stellick in the Star as Jerry passed away at the age of 90 just this past week.
Yeah, Mac was an executive of the team as well, too, put the team through some really good years.
A great scout.
You know, apparently so. We look at this sport now, the 1970s. It is really continuing. It's in the mainstream of Canadian sports. Like you talk about, a column being written in the Toronto Star, which, obviously was extremely big. But what I'm also noticing is that it's big on CHCH tournaments being covered on CBC, the national championships as well too. So why was it so big? As we even see you in competition here.
No, exactly. See, what happened was during the 60s, CBC had a Saturday afternoon show, and it was actually a little bit before my time, but some of our players, we would have a 10-game roll-off, and they would take the top 6 or 8, and they would go on television, and they would be at O'Connor Bowl, and that was on CBC with George Retzlaff, who was the producer. And John Martin souped those lanes up so fast that when Andre Morissette came along from Montreal, he was undefeated for 2 years on that show. And that was the key thing. Everybody wanted to be on it. So then when the Masters got going and we got that moving in the mid-'70s, we had 2 of our tournaments, one called the Grape and Wine Festival in September and the other the Roast Festival in June. And they were in Welland and in the Hamilton area. We were able to, CHCH came along and televised those for us live, and some of them were taped a bit, but I dealt with Dick Beddoes and John Hinnon, several names. Paul Henry from the past. Yes, exactly. He was there. And they went on for several years, and I say they still show up now on YouTube and so on. And somebody will say to me, "I saw you on TV last night bowling," and I'm thinking, "Okay, I'll have to have a look at that and so on," because I'd be the color man in the booth.
Oh,
and you see, I'd be talking. And one time though, when I made this stepladder final, I had to leave the booth and replaced by a fellow named Ian Cameron. I went out and I'd start to bowl. So I start this game that I'm in. I start on 4 strikes in a row, and I'm playing right along. Well, the fellow I'm bowling is a fellow from Hamilton named John Willick. John Willick had a slow start, but he finished on 8 in a row.
No.
And he bowled 375, and I bowled about 280, I think, and went back to the booth and continued on my commentary.
Mike, can you re-rack that viz of Walter bowling? I think that match is what we have here, which to me would be absolutely amazing, because we're talking about this being pretty big here on CHCH, as we talked about Paul Hendrick. There we are here. I think, is this not you?
That's me.
I mean, look at that. Tell me your style here. Tell me your style.
I mean, I can get down low, I'll tell you. This is pretty neat.
And I love your little finishing move there. There you go.
That's right. Like I say, I started there on 4 strikes in a row, and there's John going up there now, and like I say, John's still alive. Nice, one of our. That's the qualifying round. I'd average
good average.
280.3. Sure.
And you used to make some good side change too.
Oh, exactly. No, we did all that, and there was prizes in these tournaments. It's always fun to look in the crowd and see who was there,
right.
See where they are and what they were doing, because these people would watch. And we had these Master Bowler blue uniforms. They were the big deal, and I was involved with that with the association, obviously. And we changed from blue pants to black pants, and that was a humongous decision to do, because I had traveled out west and saw the bowlers out there in black pants, and it looked just fine, because we always had controversy over the length of skirts and all that kind of thing.
How big were these tournaments?
These tournaments were great. We had 200 tournament players on this tournament tour, and the 136 men and 64 women. And we would play 7 or 8 tournaments per year, and we'd have an aggregate champion and so on. And one of the things the big deals that I got involved in was Coca-Cola came along in the mid-'70s and gave us enough money that I could regionalize the association. And that became a big deal, because when we didn't, we had these tournaments with the youth, and we would be bringing people in by plane from Northern Ontario, sending people home by buses. And one night I was doing that in a snowstorm, saying to people on their way back to Sarnia, have a nice trip. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. I got to get something to. So Coca-Cola, a fellow named Leo McKee, came along and gave me enough money that I could regionalize it. And then in all these 24 zones, we could bring a winner from each zone. And that mattered a whole lot. And that allowed us to build what was called a teaching division. because that's what built the association up to pretty near 1,000 members.
Wow.
And that's what we needed to have in order to make it province-wide and make people want to play, because not everybody, see, we'd be coming to Sherwood for these tournaments because it was 48 lanes and they could house us all, but boy, sending people home in the middle of February was not the best plan.
You know, it's funny, everywhere I kind of, when I researched, you know, your story and what's going on with 5-pin bowling, because, you know, I thought about this. I don't know anyone that at some point of their lives, whether it be adult, adolescent, children, didn't pick up a 5-pin bowling ball and did not bowl. Yet, for some reason, in Quebec and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, it never really hooked on.
Different games.
Really?
You see, I'm doing a lot of tours right now of senior centers, and part of it is selling the last few copies I have of my book. But what my premise is that every senior bowled, and they bowled somewhere. Well, I start off my presentation showing that there are 4 bowling games still played in Canada: 5-pin, 10-pin, candlepin, and duck pins. And the duck pins are played in Quebec, and they filtered down into the States. Candlepin are played in Nova Scotia, and I played a game there about 2 years ago, and they filtered down into the States. And that's just the way the games were formed. You see, you got to go back. I'll go back to 1904 when Ryan starts the game. And you see, the American Bowling Congress organized in 1895. The first place they leave the United States and come to Canada, it's 1904, and they come to Toronto. So the game they're bringing is 10-pin, a low-scoring game. So you got to picture Tommy Ryan, this fellow that has the bowling center in downtown Toronto. He starts with 10-pin, and it's only played by the aristocrats of the day. The city councilors was a noon hour thing. There wasn't leagues the way we have today. People were just getting started because here's this game. And so you got to picture, there are no rental shoes. There's no air conditioning.
No.
The bowling lanes are on the second floor above Ryrie Burke's in downtown Toronto. Now what happens is it's a slow game, and the players don't get into it as much, you know, as they're having a lot of trouble with handling the ball, etc. So Ryan and his brother fiddle around with the pins and other forms of bowling, different shapes, and finally come up with a 5-pin, a little narrowed down with a narrow at the neck and so on, and also with the V-shaped, and they put these on the lanes, and this starts in 1909. And that's when 5-pin starts. So what happens is now, though, in this process, the bowlers start to get the hang of this, and they start to take on the game and start to raise the scores. Now, originally, we thought that when Ryan put the game together, he made the left corner pin the counter pin. You had to hit it in order to count. Because Ryan, as I was told in my younger days, was a practical joker kind of guy, so he might shake your hand and have a buzzer in his hand to just, you know. So anyway, I don't think that was, he might have been doing that, but at the same time, he sees scores going up. And this is against his mentality on bowling, because it should be a low-scoring game. So in about 1912 or 1913, he brings in this counter pin rule, which in order to count, you have to hit the left corner pin. And the count that I played with was 4, 2, 1, 3, 5. So even if you hit the left side on a spare, when your next ball, you counted 21. Mm-hmm. If you hit the other side, you counted 23. And when I first started to play, when I was talking about those lanes in the 50s, if you threw 2 balls and left the head pin, they gave you 15 anyway. So Ryan, though, brings in this counter pin. So this goes on all the way until into the 60s. And what happens then is that a group of bowlers in Ontario went down, and one of the places they went to was in Belleville, and a fellow there, his name was Bill Bateman, who owned the bowling lanes. And Bill's out there with a group of people, and they're coaching a group of children. And what they're teaching them is to hit the left corner pin first, because if we don't hit the left corner pin, we don't score. Well, they're looking at it going, no, the idea of this game is to hit the head pin, because then we hit the head pin and get a strike.
Yeah.
But with these kids, when you're dealing with 6, 7, 8, and 9-year-olds who were playing in YBC, like the Youth Bowling Council, in those days, they had to score. So they're going, we got to change this.
Yeah.
So they have discussions with Western Canada. And Western Canada had a different count, if you can believe it, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2. with the two pin, the left two pin being the counter pin. So they have a discussion on canceling the counter pin. Believe it or not, it takes 3 years to resolve this problem. 3 years. I mean, it should have taken 35 seconds. But for 1969, 70, and 71, when you bowled in the provincial championships, so they're starting right today, if you won, you didn't go anywhere. Because they canceled the Canadian Championships over this rule. Even in Niagara Falls in 1968, when they bowled the Canadian Championships down here, they played 5 games with the counterpin and 5 games without, just to see if they could talk the Western people into it. But they didn't. But in 1971, they did resolve the problem. Several people, Earl Jones, Bert Garside, Red McQuaker, names like that were involved, and the Western people. So in order to solve the problem, they took the Western count, 2-3-5-3-2, and the corner pin was abolished. And so that was a big deal. So in 1972, we ran the first provincial championships going to a Canadian again, and that was at O'Connor Bowl, the home, we're at all these, in the 60s, all this TV stuff was happening. So that was a big deal then. And so it was run at O'Connor, and the Western people, we went west then with that teams. And then in 1973, the championships were run at Sherwood Center in Hamilton, and that was the start of a run that from 73 to 2018, we only were at 2 years that we weren't at Sherwood. It was a long and a great place. Sherwood was a fantastic bowling center to watch a championship at.
Well, and the best part about Sherwood was is accessible to all people.
All people.
Up here in Hamilton as well, too. And it kind of gets me into this kind of mode here because, again, according to research here, as of the summer of 2024, and we're talking about in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, hundreds of facilities across the country. Now, they're like this.
They're like this.
They're dark.
Exactly.
There's only 26 remaining in the entire country of 5-pin bowling facilities.
Oh, no, there's more than that.
Probably Ontario, sir.
Ontario. It could be Ontario.
Yeah, sorry.
And they may be centers that are members, but in most towns, there's a bowling center. In most cases. And those centers are doing okay. The biggest center in Canada is in Oshawa, Neb's Fun World, North End Bowl it's called, and they have 52 lanes, of which what's happened now is with the push of a button, I think on about 28 of those lanes, you can bowl 5-pin or 10-pin.
Oh, wow.
Both sets of pins are up above.
That's cool.
And with a push of a button, you can be playing either game. And so bowling centers have to become family entertainment centers, and that's what North End Bowl is. Neb's Fun World has got rides, it's got everything else. I went to Florida. When we were in Florida in the wintertime, even the 10-pin center down there had a roller rink, all kinds of different things that they have to have in order to attract a certain variety of people. But what's happened in the bowling industry, and unfortunately the way it happened, freestanding buildings became a target of developers. And so the freestanding building in Kitchener, Town Bowl, the one in Palladium in Windsor, Dixon Bowl in Cambridge, all got bought up. And the other place that's having trouble now is with basements, for example, where a lot of bowling centers were. Leases are becoming an issue, and lanes are starting to disappear that way. Mm-hmm. So it's a challenge, but there are still bowling lanes. Like I say, there are still lanes. The provincial championships that we're happening right now, we're starting today in Brantford and Woodstock. Tomorrow I'll be playing in Stratford, and it's going to work out fairly well. And that's happening right across the country because the national championships this year are in the West. And the youth bowling, their championships are May 5th, 6th, and 7th, and they're up in Edmonton. And the Masters are, I think, out in British Columbia. Mm-hmm. So they're still going across the country. And as you say, Quebec sends a team because there is 5-pin bowling in the Gatineau area on the other side of Ottawa. Mm-hmm. There's several centers there, and also Newfoundland. They have several centers in Newfoundland as well, and they send teams. And even on the 5-pin side, it's a little bigger. They'll send teams from Prince Edward Island and also New Brunswick. Not New Brunswick, I mean Nova Scotia.
Nova Scotia.
They'll send teams from there. So it's still going at that level.
And that's great to hear that it still continues and that there is a love. And again, as I said off the top, because not everyone can hold a 16-pound ball and put their fingers in it like the 10-pin. But to the point, though, A Trip Down Memory Lane is a book that you have put together that tells many of these stories. And I guess you thought it was important to actually put them in a book for people to understand.
It sure was. And I figured out I better get doing it soon because I was moving quite along on the age scale. And in 2023, for example, I was starting to put it together. And so I went to the local high school, St. Mary's up in Pickering, and advertised for someone to help me with the typing. And a girl named Olivia Witalis came along in 23. And what happened was she was graduating in 2024. So I had to get the book done by then because she was going to be gone, and she's now off in Waterloo. But I did get the book out in May of 24, and we sold about 300 copies, and there are still people ordering this weekend. It was fun. It's told the whole story. It told the story of how it all started with Tommy Ryan, who was the inventor of the game. And he was born in Guelph, for example. So when I'm dealing with the proprietors of Canada, who have been a tremendous help to me, Paul Oliveira, who runs that association, we're probably going to leave a copy in the Central Library in Guelph.
Nice.
Because Tommy Ryan is apparently on a plaque there. And so it's different things like that. I left one in Panama City as I was in Florida for some of the snowbirds that might be there. But at the same time, the elite bowlers have bought the book quite readily because in a lot of cases their pictures are in there, the stories in there of the different associations. And for example, in the year 2000, as an example, CBC did a survey of the most popular inventions of the 20th century. So I got home that night it was on from like 7 to 9 or something. And I got home around 7:30 and I said to my wife, where are we at? We said, we're at number 8. And I said, has bowling been mentioned? Like, where did we fit? Hasn't been mentioned yet. I thought, oh boy, that's not good. And so I'm watching, they sit down there talking about the Cobalt space arm and all this stuff. I'm thinking, my gosh, poor bowling. But we get down to number 4, and on comes 5-pin bowling, the 4th most popular invention of the 20th century. So all of a sudden, there's TV footage, from CBC, Percy Saltzman, all these different people bowling. Marion Dibble, who was a lady who was pretty well the first lady to ever bowl. They're all there on CBC, and it's the 4th most popular invention. And I know it was a voting issue, and I thought, boy, there better be 3 ahead of this that are well worthwhile, or I'll be, thinking that we stacked the deck. Do you know what the first 3 were?
No, you tell me.
Insulin, the telephone, and the light bulb.
So then 4 is pretty prestigious.
I was pretty happy when we were
prestigious.
4th. I was pretty happy, though, when we came 4th. I said, this is a pretty good deal. So what we also did in the year 2000 for the first 90 years of the game, we selected the top 90 bowlers of the first men and women. And we had more than 500 people with a vote on this thing. And it was well put together. And we had a lady in the office compiling all the stuff. And what we did that year as well was we went to our annual meeting, and that's one thing the bowlers did extremely well. They would have an annual general meeting, which would last 4 or 5 days in Muskoka. And so this was in June, and this was a great deal to take the volunteer who had worked all year and give them 4 or 5 days at a pretty nice spot. We were at Elgin House for several years, and then we went to Cleveland's house because it got so big. And so we were up there, and we'd have meetings, and we'd have monkey golf in Las Vegas night and all kinds of different things. But anyway, we were announcing the top 90 players, and each day we'd do 30. And so the first day we do 30, and I'm not mentioned. I didn't get my name mentioned. I thought, well, that's fine. Who knows? Because I didn't know the results. I had no concept. The next day they did 30 more. I didn't get mentioned again. And I thought, boy, now I'm starting to get worrying because, boy, we're getting down here. But anyway, as it turns out, I was number 23.
Spectacular.
And that was pretty good. I was pretty happy with that. I was very happy with that. I probably got a few votes due to longevity, but still, it was a recognition of the play that I had done on the lanes and so on.
Wow. I mean, let's get right into this. I don't know too many people. I can name so many people in individual sports. And maybe as a builder and a player, they get into a Hall of Fame twice.
Yes.
What I'm seeing here is that you're going to be in a Hall of Fame for the fourth time.
This was a nice surprise. They came up just this year. The proprietors of Canada are going to recognize me for the work I've done with promotion. And it's a very small part of this, but I did have a bowling center for 2 years. Mm-hmm. You know, every man has a crisis, I've always said, at age 40. And at age 38, I had to have a bowling center, it seemed. Had to have it. And so I ended up leasing this place called Rouge Hill Bowl out in Scarborough. And I had it for 2 years, realized I maybe wasn't the best businessman, but I certainly enjoyed it. And what we were able to do in that center for that 2-year period was, believe it or not, host the second World Small Ball Championships. And when I say world, I mean world, because we had teams there from the United States, Argentina, and the Philippines. And we were able to play 5-pin and duck pin because we could move the lanes around and so on. It was sponsored by Professional Bowling, which was a company as well. There was a supplier in the industry. And so we did that in August of '83, I think it was, the second annual Small Ball Championships. And the first one was held in '79 in Manila. And the Canadian bowlers went to Manila, but in the last 3 to 4 weeks, for example, the Argentinians and the United States bowlers said, we can't make it because it was costing about $4,000 a bowler to get to Manila. But the Canadian bowlers went anyway, and that was the first international small ball championships. We had the second one in Rouge Hill, as I say, in Scarborough, and we haven't had a third. Mm. I met the duck pin people several times. Fraser Hambley, who was when we did the Top 90 project, and I'll go over some of them in a few minutes, but when we went over that, Fraser and I, who was voted the #1 male player of all time, a fellow from Toronto as well, we went down to the duck pin tour, met with some of them people. But the one thing we did when we went down there was McCoy Stadium in Pawtucket, where they played the longest Major League Baseball game in history. It went 35 innings. And around McCoy Stadium is the whole line score of the game. And in around the 19th inning, when you look at it, both teams scored 1 run.
Yes.
So the game kept going on. And they called it around the 28th inning. It was around 4 or 5 in the morning, and completed it about a week later and went to about 35 innings. But
Wow.
that was amazing to see that, just to see that line score. But then when we're dealing with Fraser and so on, and with the top 90 list, like several bowlers, Fraser was #1, but Lloyd Omerod from Hamilton was on the list. Matt Dragon was on the list. Mike Bates was 1 spot ahead of me. These are all Hamilton players. And on the ladies' side, Helen McCallum, who ran Sherwood Lanes for many years, she was #2. And the #1 lady was a lady named Millie Evans, who was a Toronto bowler, and she was a top-notch player. So I put a poster together for the top 90, and I separated them between the current era, the middle era, the post-war era, and the early era, and that separated them out. And as I say, and I put them in the shape of the pins. And Shoppers Drug Mart and the Fan 590 were big contributors to that. And the Fan 590 was quite a little story because I ended up meeting Bob McCowan down there, and Bob McCowan, of course, was a great sportscaster in the city of Toronto.
Best.
And Bob wanted to play. He wanted to play on the tour. He wanted to play on one of our tournaments, and he wanted to play on the 10-pin tour. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay. So the 10-pin tour came to Hamilton here and was up at Strikers, I think, up on the mountain, up on Lime Ridge and so on. And I took Bob over there, and we went over. And a guy named Harry Golden was running the 10-pin tour, and he looks at McCowan and says, "You got a beard. You're not allowed to play on the tour." What? McCowan says, "Look, do you want some publicity or not?" Well, Harry kind of thought it over and said, "Yeah, we do want publicity, don't we?" So they let Bob play. And Bob finished near the back, which was where he should have finished. He also then played in one of our tournaments on the 5-pin side and also finished near the back, which was good, where he should have finished. But Rob Cowan, who's one of the friends of his, has paid me several compliments because I was able to bring Bob into the atmosphere of the game, for example. And Jack Fine then outfitted them with balls and shoes and everything else to make them play 10-pin at a more relaxed level. So that was pretty good. And then Bob McCowan, he let me do the sports one day on the Fan.
Wow.
6:30, 7:30, and 8:30. So I said to him, okay, this is great because people that know me, I love to talk. But anyway, I said to Bob, how do I decide what my first story is? He said, you get the newspaper, and what's on the first page, that's your first story. Then you open it up. What's on the second page, that's your second story. And off it went. So I did that. I did that for a day and just had a marvelous time doing it. And then at the same time, the Fan gave me, for 1 year through professional bowling, where I went up there. I ended up working up there for 2 years as a vice president of their marketing department. And I had my own radio show. On Friday nights at 7 o'clock, I would be on for 5 minutes talking about the different scores and so on. So it was a neat little deal. Mm-hmm. But see, through the Star was terrific to me. 74 to 81 when the column, and my column was also the starting point for Bob Coulter, who had a column in the Hamilton Spectator for many, many years, and he was able to say, "Look, the Toronto Star is doing it. The Spectator, come on, let's go."
You got to do, for sure.
And it did, and it worked out. He went on longer than mine. My column ended in 81 when there was a big recession, and interest rates went up to 20%, all kinds of things like that. Newsprint became much more expensive. And at the same time then, what happened was, and it's interesting, because obviously the column ends in 81. Now, I went back a year later, and there was a new sports editor, and he said, it was named Jerry Hall. And he says, I know who you are, I remember. But he said, nobody has phoned me in the last 6 months saying who won the bowling tournament. And that was bad. We should have put a phone committee together.
Fakey in there.
And we should have been doing that. So what happens now, my column ends in 81, and I'm still working at the bowling. And you got to picture how fast, when I'm writing 2 columns a week and at the same time traveling across Ontario. I was president of the Master Bowlers Association by 77 and stayed there for 39 years. So I'm traveling July the 1st weekend. We were forever across Canada. I didn't keep much track of my bowling columns.
Right.
So my father passed away in 1987, just 6 years after I finished. And somebody said, here's a box of all your bowling columns. My dad had taken every one and put them in a scrapbook. And it was amazing. So I'm looking at it. So now, since 1970, from 74, for 4 years now, I've been putting them on Facebook, the date they were written.
Oh, nice.
So I just put one on yesterday from April the 16th, 1978, and it talks about people from that day, and I have 3,000 people reading them. And it's all kind of neat.
This has been an unbelievable trip down memory lane, and I encourage people to read this book. We've heard several amazing stories and put together from what you would just say is just 5-pin bowling. Sure. Walter, you've been outstanding, and thank you for reminding us of, in some ways, our youth, in some ways, our recreation and what we do. As you said, this sport has been going on for many, many years, and in particular, you're not the only one where bowling has brought life together.
People together.
Right? They've brought people together. So thank you for all you've done. Putting together this book, I encourage everyone to get out there and read this one, because we've heard some amazing stories, and amazingly Canadian stories as well, too.
Exactly.
So for all you've done, thank you very much, and enjoy your tournament this week.
I hope so.
I'm sure you're going to do good.
I hope we do okay.
I think you are.
Thanks very much.
All right. Thanks for joining us on the Sportsline Podcast.
Problem.
All right, folks, that is the Sportsline Podcast for the day. And if you just seen and heard, we love talking sports. If you do know of an athlete, team, or event to promote, the Sportsline Podcast do want to hear from you. Please hit the thumbs up, like, and subscribe button. And if you have something to say, we always appreciate your comments. For the outstanding people that make the Sportsline Podcast possible, thank you so very much. And we'll see you tomorrow.